Dear students, the lines from the textbook are I am well, he said joyously. He means here the man, the escaped American. Okay. The man announced happily that he was well. So, this is the explanation of the above line. Sadao drew his kimono, a kind of Japanese dress, round his weary body. Weary means tired. He could not, he decided suddenly, go through another night. It was not that he cared for this young man's life. No, simply it was not worth the strain. These are the lines from the textbook. Weary means here tired, strain means stress. Explanation of the above lines is Sadao wrapped his traditional Japanese gown around his tired body. He was tired because the curiosity had kept him awake for two consecutive nights. He decided that he could not pass one more night in such a way. He was not bothered about the man's life, but he could not bear the stress and anxiety any longer. Further lines from the textbook are You are well, Sadao agreed. He lowered his voice. You are so well that I think if I put my boat on the shore tonight with food and extra clothing in it, you might be able to row to that little island not far from the coast. It is so near the coast that it has not been worth fortifying. Nobody lives on it because in a storm it is submerged, but this is not the reason of a storm. This is not the season of the storm. You could live there until you saw a Korean fishing boat pass by. They pass quite near the island because the water is many fathoms. Fathoms is here deep there. Dear students, some meanings are fortifying means putting security at a place. Submerged means here sink into the sea. Fathom means a unit of measuring the depth of the sea. Explanation is Sadao said to the man that he was well now. He lowered his voice and said that he was strong enough to sail a boat. Sadao planned that if he arranged a boat, stock it with food and extra clothing, the man would be able to row it to the nearby island. As the island was so close to the coast, it had not been guarded. It was not inhabited as it sunk into the sea during the storms. As it was not the season of storms at that time, the man could live on the island until he spotted a Korean fishing boat pass by. The Korean fishing boats passed near the island as the sea was very deep there. So, this kind of planning was told by Dr. Sadao to the escaped prisoner. Okay. Further lines from the textbook are the young man stared at him. Stared at means looked at the doctor intently, slowly comprehending. Do I have to? He asked. I think so, Sadao said gently. Gently means here politely, humbly. You understand it is not hidden that you are here. The young man nodded in perfect comprehension. Okay, he said simply. Some meanings are comprehending means understanding, nodded means lower and raise one's head slightly and briefly, especially in greeting or assent or understanding or to give someone a signal, means here positively. Okay. Explanation is the young man stared Sadao as he understood his words. He asked that was it necessary for him to do so. Sadao pleaded. Pleaded means appealed that he must understand that the fact that the man was living at his house was known to everyone. The young man agreed with him and said, Okay. He moved his head to indicate his acceptance. Further lines from the textbook are Sadao did not see him again until evening. As soon as it was dark, he had dragged the stout boat, stout means here strong, okay, down to the shore, and in it he put food and bottled water. that he had bought secretly during the day, as well as two quilts he had bought at a pawn shop. The boat he tied to a post in the water, for the tide was high. Tide means here the sea waves, okay. There was no moon and he worked without a flashlight. Flashlight means here torch. Dragged means pulled. Stout means fat or big. Pawn shop means a store that lends money in exchange for a valuable thing that they can sell if the person leaving it does not pay an agreed amount of money by an agreed time. Post means here pole. Flashlight means here torch. The explanation of the above passage is: Sadao left and did not meet the young man until evening. During the day, he made arrangements for him. As it became dark, Sadao pulled out a big boat to the shore. He placed food and bottled water in it that he had bought secretly during the day. He kept two quilts in it. He had purchased them from the pawn shop. As there was a high tide in the sea, he tied the boat to a pole. It was a dark, moonless night, and Sadao worked without a torch. He did not want to be spotted by anyone. Further lines from the textbook are: When he came to the house, he entered as though he were just back from his work. And so Hana knew nothing. Yumi was here today. Yumi, that nurse for the children. She said as she served his supper. Supper is the evening meal, evening food. Though she was so modern, still she did not eat with him. Yumi cried over the baby. She went on with a sigh. She misses him so. Supper means an evening meal, typically a light or informal one. Modern means relating to the present or recent times as opposed to the remote past. Okay. Explanation is: when Sadao came home, he pretended as though he had returned from work so that Hana did not guess anything. Hana served him the evening meal and said that Yumi had visited them that day as she missed the baby a lot. Although Yumi was modern, she did not eat with Sadao. Okay. Further lines from the textbook are: The servants will come back as soon as the foreigner is gone, Sadao said. Explanation is: Sadao said that as soon as the American man left, the servants would return. So this was the confidence, because the servants, they were not against Sadao, but they were against the man who was being sheltered in the house by Dr. Sadao and Hana. He went into the guest room that night before he went to bed himself and checked carefully the American's temperature, the state of the wound, and his heart and pulse. The pulse was irregular, but that was perhaps because of excitement. The young man's pale lips were pressed together and his eyes burned. Only the scar on his neck were red. Pulse means here heartbeat. Further explanation of the above passage is: that night before going to bed, Dr. Sadao visited the man. He checked his body temperature, the wound, his heart and heartbeat. The heartbeat was unsteady due to excitement, means happiness, as he was about to leave their home. The man's lips were pressed together and his eyes were red in color, which seemed to be burning with fire. The scars on his neck were still red, as they had not healed yet. Further lines from the textbook are: I realize you are saving my life again, he told Sadao. He means here the man. Not at all, Sadao said. It is only inconvenient to have you here any longer. So this was the politeness and humbleness of Dr. Sadao. The young man said to Sadao that he was saving his life once again. Sadao said that it was not like that. He was sending him because he could not keep him any longer. Further lines from the text are: he had hesitated a good deal about giving the man a flashlight, but he had decided to give it to him after all. It was a small one, his own, which he used at night when he was called. Dear students, let us have some of the meanings. Hesitated means he paused in indecision before saying or doing something. Explanation of the above lines is Sadao was reluctant. Reluctant means unwilling in giving him a torch, as he felt that if the man used it unwisely, he could be spotted and land into trouble. Finally, he gave him his own torch, the one that he used when he had to attend to patients at night. Further lines from the textbook are: if your food runs out before you catch a boat, he said, signal me two flashes at the same instant the sun drops over the horizon. Do not signal in darkness, for it will be seen. If you are alright but still there, signal me once. You will find fresh fish, easy to catch, but you must eat them raw. A fire would be seen. Okay, the young man breathed. Runs out means finishes. Sun drops means the sun sets. Horizon means the line at which the earth's surface and the sky appear to meet. That is called skyline. Raw means uncooked. Explanation of the above passage is Sadao instructed the man. He said that if his stock of food finished before he found a Korean fishing boat, he could signal him with two flashes of the torch at dusk time. He asked him to be careful not to signal when it was dark because light was more visible in the dark as compared to dusk. He added that the man could find fish in the sea near the island, but he had to eat it raw. He was not supposed to cook it because fire would be spotted by the guards and put him in danger. The man drew a breath on hearing the instructions and said, okay. Further lines from the textbook are: he was dressed now in the Japanese clothes which Sadao had given him, and at the last moment Sadao wrapped a black cloth about his blond head. Now Sadao said. The man wore the traditional Japanese dress that Sadao gave him to wear. Finally, Sadao wrapped a black cloth around his head to hide his golden colored hair. The young American, without a word, shook Sadao's hand warmly and then walked quite well across the floor and down the step into the darkness of the garden. Once, twice, Sadao saw his light flash to find his way, but that would not be suspected. He waited until from the shore there was one more flash, then he closed the partition. That night he slept. Suspected means here doubted. Explanation of the above passage is: the American man shook hands with Sadao as he walked away towards the boat. He used the torch twice to find his way, but the guards would not doubt that. Sadao waited till he saw the torchlight once more as the man boarded the boat. Sadao closed the door of the partition and slept well that night as he had finally got rid of the man. Further lines from the textbook are: you say the man escaped? The general asked faintly. He had been operated upon a week before an emergency operation to which Sadao had been called in the night. For 12 hours, Sadao had not been sure the general would live. The gallbladder was much involved. Gallbladder means here the small SAC shaped organ beneath the liver, in which bile is stored after secretion by the liver and before release into the intestine. Explanation is: a week ago the general had been operated upon in an emergency in which Sadao took part. Sadao informed him that the man escaped. The general was weak as he was recovering from the operation. For 12 hours after the operation, his condition was critical and Sadao was not sure that he would survive. They had operated upon his gallbladder. Then the old man had begun to breathe deeply again and to demand food. Sadao had not been able to ask about the assassins. So far as he knew, they had never come. The servants had returned, and Yumi had cleaned the guest room thoroughly and had burned sulphur in it to get the white man's smell out of it. Nobody said anything, only the gardener was cross because he had got behind with his chrysanthemums. Meanings are sulfur, a chemical element used as a disinfectant. Cross means angry or disappointed. Chrysanthemum, a flower. This is the name of the flower. Okay. Further explanation of the above passage is the general was an old man. After the operation, gradually he started eating food and breathed deeply. Sadao did not have the courage to ask him what happened to the professional killers that he had promised to send to kill the American man. Sadao knew that the killers did not turn up ever. At Sadao's home, things returned to normal. The servants returned. Yumi used sulfur to disinfect the room used by the American man. The servants did not speak anything. The gardener was annoyed because he had got late to plant the chrysanthemum flowers due to his this incident. But after a week, Sadao felt the general was well enough to be spoken to about the prisoner. Your yes, Excellency. Excellency means here this is the address to the general. He escaped, Sadao now said. He coughed, signifying that he had not said all he might have said, but was unwilling to disturb the general further. But the old man opened his eyes suddenly. Explanation is after 1 week, Sadao felt that the general was well enough that he could discuss the man with him. Sadao said that the man had escaped. Sadao coughed up, which indicated that Sadao had not told him everything as he did not want to disturb him. The general was reminded of his promise to send the professional killers, and he opened his eyes suddenly when he heard about the American man. Further lines from the textbook are the prisoner, he said with some energy, did I not promise you I would kill him for you? The general was reminded of his promise and asked Sadao that he had not promised him to get that man killed by his personal professional killers. So this is the explanation of the above passage. Further lines are, you did, Excellency, Sadao said. Well, well, the old man said in a tone of amazement. So I did. But you see, I was suffering a good deal. The truth is, I thought of nothing but myself. In short, I forgot my promise to you. So these are the lines in which you can take for granted as the character sketch of general. Okay, so these lines are showing that general was really a selfish person, but whatever was done by Dr. Sadao, perhaps it was better for him and for both. Amazement means here surprise. Explanation is Sadao replied that he had promised him. The general was surprised and said that as he was suffering due to bad health, he had forgotten all about the promise that he had made. I wondered, Your Excellency, Sadao murmured. It was certainly very careless of me, the general said, but you understand it was not lack of patriotism or dereliction of duty. He looked anxiously at his doctor. If the matter should come out, you would understand that, wouldn't you? Patriotism means love for one's country. Dereliction means failure to perform one's duty. Sadao spoke softly that he wondered that the general had forgotten his promise. Wondered means he was thinking, he thought. The general felt sorry that he had been careless. He added that it was neither that he did not love Japan nor that he was shirking from his duty. He looked at Sadao with curiosity as he sought support from him. He wondered that Sadao understood his problem. Further lines from the text are, "Certainly, Your Excellency," Sadao said. He suddenly comprehended that the journal was in the palm of his hand and that, as a consequence, he himself was perfectly safe. "I can swear to your loyalty, Excellency," he said to the old general, "and to your zeal against the enemy." Here, the meanings are, the general was in the palm of his hand means he had control of the general. Consequence means result. Zeal means great energy or enthusiasm in pursuit of a cause or an objective. Explanation is, Sadao said that he understood the general's position well. He understood that the general was in his control and as a result Sadao was safe. Sadao said that he could swear upon the general's loyalty towards Japan and his enthusiasm to fight the enemy. Further lines from the text are, "You are a good man." The general murmured and closed his eyes. "You will be rewarded." But Sadao, searching the spot of black in the twilighted sea that night, had his reward. There was no prick of light in the dusk. No one was on the island. His prisoner was gone safe, doubtless, for he had warned him to wait only for a Korean fishing boat. Dear students, twilighted means at the time of twilight, that is sunset or sunrise. Okay. Prick means slightest amount. Dusk means the time of sunset. Explanation of the above passage is, the general was relaxed and said that Sadao was a good man. He closed his eyes and said that Sadao would be rewarded for his goodness. Sadao got his reward when at dusk he looked towards the island and saw no trace of torchlight. This meant that the American man had found a Korean fishing boat and had gone with it safely back home. Sadao did not doubt this as he had instructed the man to wait for a Korean fishing boat. Further lines are, he stood for a moment on the veranda gazing out to the sea from whence the young man had come that other night, and into his mind, although without reason, there came other white faces he had known. The professor at whose house he had met Hannah, a dull man, and his wife had been a silly talkative woman in spite of her wish to be kind. He remembered his old teacher of anatomy, who had been so insistent on mercy with the knife, and then he remembered the face of his fat and slatternly landlady. He had great difficulty in finding a place to live in America because he was a Japanese. The Americans were full of prejudice, and it had been bitter to live in it. Knowing himself their superior, how he had despised means hated, the ignorant and dirty old woman who had at last consented means given permission, to house him in her miserable home. He had once tried to be grateful means a thankful, to her because she had in his last year nursed him through influenza, but it was difficult, for she was no less repulsive to him in her kindness. Now he remembered the youthful, haggard face of his prisoner, white and repulsive. Strange, he thought, I wonder why I could not kill him. So, whence means here where. Anatomy means the branch of science concerned with the bodily structure of humans, animals, and other living organisms, especially as revealed by dissection and the separation of parts. Slatternly means dirty or untidy. Prejudice means preconceived idea or opinion. Bitter means unpleasant. Despised means hated. Miserable means in poor condition. Grateful means here thankful. Nursed means taken care of. Influenza means a highly contagious viral infection of the respiratory passages causing fever. Repulsive means awful or terrible. Haggard means looking exhausted and unwell, especially from fatigue, worry, or suffering. Dear students, let us have the explanation of the above passage. Sadao stood in the veranda and recollected the past events. He looked at the sea from where the man had come that night. He had flashbacks of all the Americans he had met in his life, the dull professor at whose house he had met Hannah, his silly talkative wife who was very kind. He remembered his teacher of anatomy who had taught them to cut open the body with a knife. Then he remembered the fat, untidy landlady. Being a Japanese, he had found an accommodation in America with great difficulty. He hated living there, knowing that the Japanese were superior to the Americans and still being treated like inferiors. Sadao disliked the dirty old woman who finally agreed to let him live in her home, which was in a bad condition. Sadao tried to be thankful to her because she had taken care of him when he was struck by influenza during the last year of his stay in America. It was difficult for Sadao to be thankful to her as he hated her, even though she was kind to him. Sadao hated her so much that her kindness also did not make him like her. Finally, Sadao remembered the weak face of the American prisoner. It was white in color and was terrible. Sadao felt that it was strange that he could not kill his enemy. So, this is the end of the chapter after completing at least 11 days, 11 lectures. Okay, thank you very much, students.